It's been 3 years since my family had last gone on a vacation to Florida, something we did annually before the recession had hit. Since we now had enough money, my parents decided, under the popular demand of my sister and I, that we go to Walt Disney World again. We were both teenagers, and our parents kind of saw this as a bit juvenile, but decided it'd be fun anyways. I couldn't wait to finally go back, and neither could my sister. Being avid theme park goers as well, we were especially attracted to the creativity and the magic, as one would say, about the rides there. They never got old, and they had their share of nostalgia and excitement. However, there was one other reason I wanted to go. You normally associate Disney World with words such as excitement, fun, and happiness, but with these characterizations come counterbalances. After scrolling through OMG Facts one night, I came across a rather interesting story, and it was about an abandoned water park in Walt Disney World, apparently named River Country. Now, I was absolutely appalled by this, since I had previously thought of Disney in a more idealistic and perfect way. The water park was directly on the shores of Bay Lake, being that huge, stagnant body of water adjacent to the Magic Kingdom. River Country was, and still is, on the same side as the theme park just mentioned. But right next to the resort called Walt Disney's Fort Wilderness Resort, surrounding the water park on the resort side is a large green wall with signs dotting it. These read, "Sorry, River Country is closed." Now, the place opened in 1976 and used water from Bay Lake in most of these attractions. It was very rustic and wilderness-based in design and contained artificial rocks that resembled those used on another well-known ride, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. There was a dam present to keep chunks of dirt and mud from getting into the water too, so guests didn't have to worry about swimming in an artificial bog created by water from the lake. It was open for about 25 years, and it closed its door in 2001, and in 2005 a statement released by Disney said the park was closed for good. So for about 11 years, River Country has been sitting abandoned. Nature is in its advanced stages of reclaiming the area, but the slides remain. And so do the artificial rocks. And the small pond, which is now a swamp, was used for swimming. And many urban explorers have infiltrated the area, jumping over the walls to get footage of the abandoned water park. One of the most controversial things about the park nowadays is why it's closed, which is what I was destined to even find out. I wanted to see some real footage of the area before it closed down as well, since from what I heard, it was actually very joyous and bustling with tourists, compared to its ghost town status lately. Now, I was without internet at the time, so about 2 days before we were planning to leave, I actually went to the local library, which archived many old videos that people in my community had dug up in their attics and donated to the library to be a part of a small historical society. Hoping that I might find some good footage, I asked the librarian if they happened to carry out any videos dating back to 2001. She nodded and brought me to a small section containing many old VCR cassettes, and a few DVDs here and there. And after about half an hour of searching, I finally came across a cassette with the words, "The Old-Fashioned Swimming Hole," inscribed on top of it. This was a term used to describe River Country during its glory days, so I took it, almost certain that it was the footage I was actually looking for. I asked the librarian if I could sign it out, but she told me that the historical videos had to stay in the library. I could, however, watch the video in a small conference room behind the front desk. The librarian led me to the windowless room, and I took a seat in front of the television. She left the room and closed the door so the audio would not disturb any of the other library patrons. I popped the cassette into the VCR under the TV and turned the lights off so I could see the video better. I was expecting the quality to be low. So for about half a minute or so, the screen was gray and was accompanied with a loud beeping noise. It was typical for old VCR cassettes. The gray soon disappeared, showing footage of two individuals in front of the entrance to River Country. They were both men, and it was very late at night, or very early in the morning. As nobody else was in the park, very few of the water park's lights were on either. On the bottom left corner of the screen, the date November 1st, 2001 was displayed. This was significant because the water park closed for good the very next day, on the 2nd. The two men were talking about how they had been denied entrance to the park in the morning, since it had reached its guest capacity limit. They also stated that only at these hours of night could they get past the park security. The two walked to the bigger water slides in the park, which led directly into the pond. Supplied by the green water of Bay Lake, once they both got to the top of the slide, which was encircled by artificial orange rocks, one man prepared to slide down. The two laughed over what seemed to be an inside joke, and finally, the cameraman ended up pushing his friend down. I heard him scream in delight as he descended to the pond. The cameraman then proceeded back to, back the way they came to get to the slides, and across a bridge that traversed a small lagoon. He ended up back to the pond's shore, where the sound of a splash was heard. This is when the video started to unsettle me a little. After waiting at the shore of the pond for about 3 minutes, nobody surfaced back. The cameraman began to cry his friend's name frantically and started to run back to get help at the Fort Wilderness Resort. He stopped abruptly, though, at what seemed to be a kiddie area, a small, shallow pond, on hearing a faint cough. He instantly turned around and saw a barely visible shadow about 10 or so feet behind him. Relieved, the cameraman started to approach his friend, glad that he was okay, but again, he abruptly halted. The friend's head was hanging down, and he slowly inched it up. The cameraman started to hyperventilate as the features of the other man's face began to show. Crimson, dry blood was caked around his mouth, and some was even dripping off of his chin. He was missing all the hair on his head as well, but one of the most disturbing parts of this image was that there were patches of skin missing that revealed part of the man's skull and jawbone. And he was even missing his right eye, leaving this empty socket. I became severely nauseous at the sight of this, to the point where I was swallowing my own vomit. My heart also began to race as fear started to settle in my body. As the last minutes of the film approached, the horrendous figure muttered something that sounded like, "There is no hope under the water." With that, the cameraman ran for his life, wheezing and panicking through this ordeal. I wanted to turn the television off and run myself, so I bolted to the door and, leading out of the room, reached for the doorknob but paused. The television was giving off the sound of an old furnace found in the basement of a home, just in a softer tone. And this tone, for some unknown reason, kept me from moving anywhere. My body was paralyzed, and I just stared blankly at the television, and I began to internally panic. What the fuck was actually even going on? The cameraman was still sprinting, but didn't seem to be making any progress. He had ended up back into the large pond where the slide had dumped his friend, and you could hear him sobbing softly, fearing for his life. Suddenly, the tape began to slowly, gradually go down, just slow up. And as the man frantically looked from side to side, the audio volume, along with that furnace noise, went up as the video lagged. Haltingly and deafeningly, the cameraman turned all the way around and shrieked at the sight of his friend. The video paused on this frame, exposing the caked blood all over the other man's face. The top of his skull was now completely exposed, with his right eye still missing. His mouth was wide open, and coming from it was what looked like a combination of the water from Bay Lake and bile. This stayed on the screen for about 10 seconds and switched to a black screen displaying one single message: "The epidemic begins today." Instantly the power went out, and I was left alone in the darkness of the conference room. I became terrified, as I couldn't see a thing, and I couldn't see the door either. I began to shake violently, fearing for my own life. River Country had closed because of this, and it was obvious. Walt Disney World had been keeping a disgusting secret. I rushed to the other side of the room, disoriented. River Country is an actual abandoned water park that's been sitting dormant in Walt Disney World for over a decade. Oddly, the lights are still on within the area, and the music still plays as well. Many theories have come up about its closing, but one of the most plausible ones, and one that was confirmed by Walt Disney World employees, is that a deadly type of amoeba was found within the water of Bay Lake, which was used to supply many parts of the theme park. This amoeba can cause several illnesses or death. So, as a precautionary measure, Disney closed the park for good. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was another story about Disney. Now, I know that we get a lot of these Disney stories sometimes, and they end up being some of the most popular stories we ever really get to read on Haunted Gaming, creepypastas, really. Because, frankly, there's a lot of mystery lore, I guess, surrounding this kind of stuff, and it's always an interesting topic for many people in this kind of a community. So, for me personally, this is the second time hearing of any closed-off park by Disney. The first one is obviously Discovery or Treasure Island, which was the Animal Observatory, which has a status of standing but not operational, but it's never going to come back, really. And this becomes another crossed off the business list by Disney because it was an actual water park that got completely shut down. And the reality of this is, as Disney's River Country was most definitely shut down due to the fact that it was probably a bad business decision for Disney, and they were probably hemorrhaging more money than making anything on this park, and instead of making something run, they'd rather cut it off right at the source instead of continuing to hemorrhage or lose money regardless. You may wonder why money it would be a big issue for Disney, but hey, if you want to stay rich, you gotta understand, where to put your money, right? So, frankly, it's better to keep it there than it is to lose it, and that frankly explains the shutdown quite easily. And the official reason for it ties in as well. Disney frankly didn't see a lot of guest demand, and so it had to close down. 2005, officially it was announced that it would never open again. And there are people that actually did break into this place, people on YouTube as well that broke in and got some footage basically trespassing this park. And, it's very common. You get to see that everywhere. So if you really want to see footage, you can find it on the internet. You can even see footage all the way back when people were actually over there, of course, when the park was completely operational. Now, the story here ties into the fact that there is a brain-eating parasite, or amoeba in this case, that completely fucks up the human body to the point where they're losing eyeballs, they are losing parts of their skin, and all kinds of that lovely zombie nonsense. Now, this might seem like a massive little cliche, and I swear I thought that at first, but the problem is, in the state that this is taking place in Florida, this kind of a case can actually really exist. For example, if you look up something called meningoencephalitis, probably sure I mispronounced right now, but basically what this is inflammation or infection in the brain. Now, this comes from bacteria, viral infections, and amoebas as well. So when you first come across this cliche, it might hit you pretty hard, in that, oh, we kind of jumped the shark. But it's something that could potentially really happen, and it has happened. There are only a handful of people that have ever really survived cases like this, because of course when you get inflammation of the brain, infections of the brain, these things can be really, really hard to take care of, really hard to fix up. At that moment, unfortunately, it's pretty easy to know that you are in fact fucked if you have similar cases to this. There's actually been children who have died in Florida, not exactly in this park, from playing in the water and getting infected by some of these amoebas or, other little pathogens that can cause this kind of an issue. So it is something that is real. Now, to the extent this creepypasta dictates where you got these zombie-like symptoms, I don't think we're exactly getting the Last of Us 2 vibes going on with this, but frankly, what is offered over here is something that I think can potentially really happen. And could it be one of the reasons that Disney shut down this park? I would not be totally uninclined to believe that didn't have a factor in closing this park down as well. I think having a water park in an area where you have natural water coming in from places that have these kind of bacterias, virals, and amoebas, you probably don't want to have the general public playing around in it and mixing themselves into that water, because God forbid that happened to anybody at Disney's parks. It would become a massive issue for the company, so much so that this would cause national and international issues for these people, and God forbid they'd ever want to try getting another water park going on with such a gross fuck up on their end. It would cause massive issues for the company. So I wouldn't doubt that to an extent this was real. Not the fact that you have the zombie amoeba going around the park and people are getting infected, but the fact that this was a reason that this park isn't really there anymore. It doesn't even have a standing but not yet operational status. It's completely closed, and I think when Disney really looked at it, this definitely had to be a factor for them. Creepy? Yeah, it definitely is, and I think that's where the creepypasta shines as well. It says enough to make it realistic, and even when it is cliched, a simple look up on it can really prove the fact that, to an extent, this isn't half wrong. So, I guess in the end, I just want to know what you think about Disney's second park that we're basically hearing of that's completely gone off the map, and what you think about these brain-eating amoebas. Is it a reason that Disney might have shut this park down, or is it just purely money-related? I think it's a mix of both, maybe more, but this has been another episode of Creepypasta as part of Haunted Gaming. As always, I like to ask you what you would rate and change to make this story better. And if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like if you dislike it. This is me, Mudahar, and I am out.